mail-order abortion pills. The history of the gradual loosening of FDA restrictions on the abortion drug over more than 2 decades is stunning. This latest step, mail-order abortion, ignores clear dangers. In practice, abortion pills are 5 times more dangerous than surgical abortions, and there are problems with simple research. The effect of blocking hormones among developing teens is entirely unstudied. More Republicans are seeking an end to military abortions. A new letter to Defense Secretary Austin restates their case that Congress never authorized such actions. This is Life News Radio. The View, the accurate view of the human person, changes everything. The news you hear and see pertaining to the human person has the power to inform or misinform your opinions and what you do with the gift of life and what you allow your government to do. It's why we at this station offer news on the life issue. We hope you carefully assess what you hear, read, and view. Law in Peru may contain the most advanced recognition of the person of the unborn child. Its constitution has long protected such persons, but new law just passed precisely expresses how these persons are to be recognized with their genetic identity and their possession of specific rights. The U.S. March for Life in January wants every woman to be aware of what she needs to protect her child. The slogan, "With every woman, for every child," is an effort with a vast network of pro-life resources to raise awareness of that help. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at livenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for November 17th. Today we celebrate Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. A queen may be an unlikely person to be known for her love for the poor and suffering, but that's who Elizabeth of Hungary was and why the common people treasured her in 13th century Hungary. The daughter of Hungary's king, Elizabeth was married to Louis Thuringia at age 14. It was a happy union that produced 3 children. Under the spiritual direction of a Franciscan, she led a life of prayer, sacrifice, and service to the poor and sick. She wore simple clothing and each day fed the hundreds of poor people who came to the royal gates. After 6 years of marriage, Elizabeth lost her husband in the Crusades. Although grief-stricken, Louis's family expelled her from the palace, claiming that she'd squandered Louis's fortune. Eventually restored to her rightful position, she became a secular Franciscan and spent the remaining few years of her short life caring for the poor in a hospital that she founded and dedicated to St. Francis. Elizabeth died in 1231 before her 24th birthday and was canonized 4 years later. She is the patron of Catholic Charities and of the secular Franciscan order. There's more about the saints along with inspiration and Catholic resources at our website, saintoftheday.org. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
Ask a Priest Live, weekdays at 6 p.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross. We'll bring you a different priest each weekday where you can participate in a live Q&A on the topics that matter. To get your question in for Father, call 1-877-511-5483 while the show is live. Email us anytime at priests@thestationofthecross.com or visit our show page at thestationofthecross.com/askapriest.
Hi, Joe McLean here, host of A Catholic Take, heard on the Station of the Cross each weekday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. A bold synthesis of information and inspiration, keeping you up to date on the news and issues that you may have missed from a courageous Catholic perspective. That's A Catholic Take, weekday morning, 7 a.m. right here on the Station of the Cross and the free iCatholic Radio mobile app. Download it today. God love you.
This is Joe McLean, and you're listening to the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of the truth with clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McLean starts now.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean, and it's great to be on with you. Good morning and happy Friday, by the way. Praise be to God. Bishop Joseph Strickland. Last night he was on The World Over Live with Raymond Derorio, and he basically said he was fired among a few other reasons for not implementing Traditionis custodes. He didn't crack down on the traditional Catholic movement within the church, within his diocese, and that was on the list for reasons why he was fired. Seems awfully similar to the guy in Puerto Rico. Dr. Anthony Stine from Return to Tradition is going to be our guest at 30 past the hour to give us the list of bishops who have been fired most recently. This seems to be a growing list and a growing trend. He's going to weigh in on that at 30 past. Michael Hichborn is back on the program from the Lepanto Institute. He's got an open letter to the USCCB. Why, after all of these years and mountains of documented evidence, have they not been paying attention? They continue to fund organizations that are inherently against what we believe as Catholics. They support evil causes, and we're giving them money. Why? He's going to weigh in on that at 14 past the hour. Lots of stories to cover today. We will, of course, share everything in the show notes. And today I'm going to send you an email to include the video, the movie of Mother Pasqualina. You're going to love it. It's great. It's going to be in the email, so make sure to join the list. Just go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT. You can see the email sign-up link at the top there. Click that. It just takes one moment to get on the insiders list. But let's pray. Let's begin. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And now your saint of the day.
Saint Gregory the Wonder Worker, pray for us. Gregory was born with the name Theodore into a noble pagan family in Asia Minor around the year 213. After the death of his father, Theodore and his brother attended to study law. But after encountering the famed scholar Origen in their travels, the brothers changed their plans and became disciples of Origen. And at their eventual baptism, Theodore changed his name as well, to Gregory. They studied under Origen for some years before returning home, where before long a reluctant Gregory was consecrated Bishop of Caesarea, a diocese with only 17 members. About this same time, Gregory received one of the earliest apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary, along with St. John the Evangelist, who delivered to Gregory a statement of Trinitarian doctrine. The bishop would go on to defend the faith against several heresies and preserve his flock from persecution. He attracted many converts through the public celebration of holy days and the feasts of saints. Most famously, Gregory earned his surname Thaumaturgus, or Wonder Worker, by performing countless miracles, including numerous healings, dominion over nature, and escapes from or conversions of persecutors. For preventing the river Lycus from flooding, he became a patron against all floods, and after shifting a hill to make way for a church, as well as moving great boulders on other occasions, he is a patron against earthquakes. He is also, like St. Jude, a patron of hopeless causes, likely because of the countless conversions he brought about. It is said that after beginning with a diocese of only 17 Catholics, at his death around the year 270, Gregory governed a diocese containing only 17 pagans. St. Gregory the Wonder Worker, pray for us.
And now your headline news. The Hill reports Paul Pelosi's attacker found guilty of federal kidnapping and assault charges. The man who broke into former Speaker Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco home and violently attacked her husband, Paul Pelosi, was found guilty on federal assault and attempted kidnapping charges on Thursday. David DePay faces up to life in prison. Court filings indicate he also is still facing a trial for state charges, including attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse, and residential burglary.
Catholic Vote is reporting USCCB overwhelmingly supports naming John Henry Newman a doctor of the church. At their annual meeting in Baltimore this week, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops voted overwhelmingly in support of making St. John Henry Newman a doctor of the church. The Bishops' Conference of England and Wales initially proposed the idea, and the bishops of Ireland and Scotland have agreed to support it. Upon the request of Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the U.S. bishops will send a letter to the Holy Father supporting the proposal. Only 2 U.S. bishops voted against the motion, while 240 bishops voted in favor. And Epoch Times reports growing calls to ban TikTok after Osama bin Laden letter to America goes viral. The al-Qaeda leader sent a letter to the United States in 2002, just months after the September the 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks that launched a U.S. war against the Islamic terror group. He specifically made mention of the United States' long-standing support for Israel, which drew praise from TikTok users in widely shared videos. The bin Laden letter, which has been on the left-wing newspaper The Guardian's website since the early 2000s, blames Israel for provoking the Muslim world to commit terrorist attacks against the West. Rep. Josh Gothamer, a Democrat from New Jersey, told the New York Post that the videos show how China-owned TikTok is pushing pro-terrorist propaganda to influence Americans, adding that TikTok must be banned or sold to an American company to prevent this. And those are your headline news. The gospel today comes to us from Luke chapter 17, verses 26 through 37. Also, the feast day of St. Elizabeth of Hungary, by the way. Jesus said to his disciples, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage up to the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Similarly, as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building. On the day when Lot left Sodom, fire and brimstone rained from the sky to destroy them all. So it will be on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, someone who is on the housetop and whose belongings are in the house must not go down to get them. And likewise, one in the field must not return to what was left behind. Remember the wife of Lot. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses it will save it. I tell you, on that night, there will be 2 people in one bed. One will be taken, the other one left. And there will be 2 women grinding meal together. One will be taken, the other left." They said to him in reply, "Where, Lord?" He said to them, "Where the body is, there also the vultures will gather." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Haydock's Catholic commentary, quoting the Venerable Bede, St. Bede, said, after having compared his second coming to lightning, that was yesterday's gospel, in order to show how sudden it will be, he next compares it to the days of Noah and Lot, to show that it will come when men least expect it, when, entirely forgetting his coming, they are solely occupied in the affairs of this world, in buying and selling. He only mentions those faults which appear trivial, or rather none at all, passing over the crimes of murder, theft, etc., purposefully to show that if God thus punishes merely the immoderate use of what is lawful, how will his vengeance fall upon what is in itself unlawful? Now, your neighbors are going to think this refers to, the rapture. We're going to be raptured out of here. But no. That's not at all what is going on here. Haydock goes on to say, when you see the war lighted up in Judea, lose no time, but take yourself to flight for safety. Could war in Israel be a sign of the times? And might you respond accordingly? Seems like Haydock thought so anyway. Haydock goes on to quote St. Ambrose, as Lot only escaped destruction by leaving all things and flying immediately to the mountain. The thing you're supposed to do is run to safety. Whereas his wife, by showing an affection for the things she had left, and looking back perished. So those who in the future time of tribulation, forgetting the reward that awaits them in heaven, look back to the pleasures of this world, which the wicked enjoy, and are sure to perish. Therein lies the key, isn't it? How attached are you to this world? You want money in your back pocket. You want blue skies and low humidity. You want a good time. You want, Kid Rock and MMA fights, and you want to just go to rock and roll concerts and enjoy this world for all of its good pleasures. Are you prepared to leave it all behind, to say goodbye to this world and watch it burn in the fires that are coming in the tribulation? Are you prepared to embrace heaven at all cost, even if it costs you personally? Therein lies the key. We're not going to be raptured out of here so that we can be saved from persecution. We're going to have to undergo persecution so that we can choose heaven and say goodbye to this world. The real key is, will you use your talents, your gifts, your treasures, what God has given to you, so that you can help your neighbor make that choice? Therein lies the key. Therein lies the key. Where the body is, an image of Jerusalem surrounded and besieged. We need to be paying attention to the signs of the times. We need to be paying attention. When Trajan surrounded Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Christians knew the signs of the times, and they left. They ran for the security of Pella and other communities. And Jerusalem was destroyed utterly, and 1 million lives were lost. The blood ran thick as a river. And by the way, at about the same time that Jerusalem, the temple, is being destroyed and not one stone was left upon another, so was the temple of Jupiter in Rome. The blood seed of the martyrs had truly been planted, and God's holy will be accomplished, even through fire and tribulation. The question is, whose team are you on? Make your choice. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, this is Steve Gleason with your one-minute tool for Catholic evangelism. Here's the question for your non-Catholic friend. Many committed Christians hold to this axiom: if it's in the Bible, I believe it, and that settles it. Well, here you go. 1 Timothy 2 states the following about women as related to church life: no braiding the hair, no gold jewelry, no pearls. Just learn in silence and do not teach. Does your pastor comply with these biblical instructions? Well, here's your 3 best friendship tools for Catholic evangelism. Number 1, an unpleasant fact. Many self-proclaimed Bible-only churches, sadly, will pick and choose what parts of the Bible are implemented in the life of the church. Secondly, Catholic catechism. Be especially attentive to, quote, the content and unity of the whole scripture. And thirdly, a tough comeback. In order to understand the sacred author's intention, we must take into account culture, audience, and the literary genre. So if your Bible-only church does not strictly obey those instructions, then tell me the reason why. Well, we know, 80% of your church is handled by women. So with those instructions in force, many women will leave your church, maybe even the pastor's wife. Ouch.
The Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network is dedicated to answering the critical need of access to quality, consistent, professional, and proven Catholic programming. We cannot rely on other media outlets to properly represent our church. Catholic radio reaches Catholics, non-Catholic Christians, and non-believers alike. As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent of your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported.
What you're offering and giving to me, you deserve to get back, because you're offering more than I can give.
I learned so much through the Station on the Cross. I listen to the radio station daily, and I absolutely love it.
I was attending the chapel and places like that, and through your programs, I was able to find out how other Protestants had come back into the Catholic Church. God bless the Station of the Cross.
Donate today at thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. Dr. Anthony Stine from Return to Tradition is going to be our guest at 30 past the hour. It turns out that last night, Bishop Joseph Strickland was on The World Over Live with Raymond Arroyo, and he actually made the statement that he was relieved for not having collegiality with his brother bishops and not implementing Traditionis custodes. He didn't lay the hammer down on the tried Catholics in his diocese. And so that was one of the reasons why he was relieved of his duties. We're going to get Dr. Anthony Stine to weigh in on that and give us the list of bishops who have been relieved of their duties in a similar fashion. It's a growing list, to be sure. But just this week, we saw that the USCCB met, of course, in their annual meeting. And there was an open letter by Michael Hichborn at Lepanto Institute to the bishops. I mean, for years, this man has been documenting, providing evidence, dossiers, hand delivering these reports to them, and they refuse to listen. They still fund these organizations that are absolutely doing evil things. And so he wrote an open letter this week. We've invited him back on the program to give us the lowdown. Good morning to you, Michael Hichborn.
Good morning, Joe.
Hey, can I just say thank you for pitching in while I was in Rome? You did a great job. God bless you and God love you for being on the team. We really do appreciate having you.
You know what? It was a lot of fun.
Oh, good. Praise God. Well, we'd like to have you back then.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the USCCB. How did the meeting go in general this week? I know you follow it very closely. You have for many years.
Yeah, so I was actually up in Baltimore during the USCCB meeting. I had a great opportunity to pray with Bishop Strickland outside, and I was able to dine with him and accompany him to another rosary at a different location. And my general impression of the USCCB meeting is just more of the same. It seems to me that they're focused so much now on this Eucharistic Congress, and Bishop Strickland was talking about the Eucharistic Congress, saying, look, if we want to have a Eucharistic revival, what we have to focus on is not just the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but in Eucharistic coherence. We have to understand that in receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, that if we are not properly disposed to that reception, that we actually damn ourselves. And he spoke very lovingly in those terms, but one of the things that was very concerning about the way that the USCCB was talking about it is that it seems to be in line with Amoris Laetitia and this idea that, well, we need to start expanding who can receive Holy Communion, who can approach for Holy Communion. This idea that active homosexuals, which came out of the Synod, active homosexuals can come, and transgenders even, come up and receive Holy Communion. Once you start opening that Pandora's box, you magnify the amount of sacrilege that is being committed and spread throughout the world, and it's only going to bring the wrath of God.
Yeah, exactly. And who's paying attention to that, apparently? Let's talk about your open letter. I can tell you, I personally once heard a bishop talk about receiving your reports and how he refused to even read them and would just circle file them, put them in the trash bin. And I remember listening to this bishop say that, and it just blew my mind. I'm like, you won't even consider what's inside that report? You won't even think about, ponder about, even for a minute about what's in that report, or let alone actually debunk what's in that report? And the answer is no, and it seems to me like the vast majority, now you've got more experience at this than anybody. It seems to me the vast majority of bishops aren't putting any effort whatsoever into actually reviewing the evidence that you have supplied over the past 15 years. Why is that? And is that an accurate assessment? Have I gotten that correctly? Or maybe I'm surprised and there's more bishops that give you more time and energy in actually looking at what you've put together.
There are a handful of bishops that have listened. I can't say for sure who they are now, but at least 5-10 years ago when I was doing this research and putting these reports forward and talking to bishops about this kind of thing, I do know that there were several that were not taking up the CCHD collection because of the reports that I was putting out. But by and large, yeah, the response is that most bishops, they don't want to know. They don't want to know because for some reason, they are incredibly wedded to maintaining the CCHD collection, to not bucking the system, to not asking questions. And I don't know if this is some sort of weird collegiality thing, or if this is some kind of, honestly, I just don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about some of these bishops that makes them not want to look. The fact of the matter is that we just take the information straight from the organization itself. It's not like we're making it up.
Yeah. That's something that Bishop Strickland mentioned last night on Raymond Arroyo's program is that, he didn't have collegiality with his fellow bishops. He didn't go along to get along. There seems to be quite a bit of pressure upon the bishops to go along to get along, to not rock the boat. I was recently at a conference in Alabama, and the keynote speaker there is a bishop from Texas. I won't mention his name because it wasn't Bishop Strickland. And he laid the hammer upon us about go along to get along. Don't rock the boat. Never say anything controversial. Don't air the dirty laundry in public. Just say nice things all the time. And I remember listening to that, thinking how passive aggressive it was, number one. But number two, it's like, this really is the pressure that they must feel in the hierarchy. And it almost makes me feel sad for the bishops, because I think there's a lot of good men who are as bishops, but they lack the courage to speak out. Something Bishop Strickland said in his interview last night with Raymond Arroyo. Most just don't. You think that's a fair assessment? Do you think there's good men as bishops, but they just don't have that courage to stand up and say what must be said?
Well, you're absolutely right. But what's really funny is that what a contrast that is with the apostles when they were with our Lord. They fought all the time with each other. Yeah. I mean, they were arguing over which one of them was the greatest. I mean, that you don't see that kind of argumentation taking place now. You don't see those bishops disagreeing with each other or putting forth an idea that, hey, you're wrong about this. You really shouldn't be preaching these terrible ideas. St. Paul said, there are those who are walking among you who are wolves in sheep's clothing. They are enemies of the cross of Christ. And he even outlined exactly how to identify them. But today, the bishops are just, they seem to be so kowtowed and so cowardly. And that's the only word that comes to mind. They're cowards. If they're afraid of being bitten by their brother bishops, then maybe their brother bishop isn't a sheep, but a wolf.
Yeah, with choices. Do you remember the St. Paul Barnabas reunion tour? No, neither do I. They didn't get along, did they? But we seem to have forgotten all of that. Let's talk about your letter in particular. So you wrote this open letter. What's in it? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, what I did, I reminded the bishops that, look, I sent you information back in September. I wanted you to understand the kinds of organizations that are receiving funding from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. And I then pointed out that Bishop Timothy Sr., the current chairman of the CCHD subcommittee, vehemently defended CCHD grants. He went so far as to say that the information contained in my reports were quote-unquote unfounded. And that line really bothered me, because everything that we have in our reports is extremely well documented. Yes. We use screen captures from their own sources to show, yes, they're saying these things. They really are. So I said, is it unfounded for us to show you or is the information that was contained in our report on Congregations United to Serve Humanity, a CCHD grantee that got a grant from 2022 to 2023 that was giving homosexual pornographic material to kids? Is our information there wrong? Is it inflammatory, as Bishop Senior seems to say? What about this organization that we just put a report out on called Unchained? This organization, the founder of this organization, she's a Marxist. She was out there openly celebrating the brutal communist dictator Fidel Castro. One of her employees was a secretary for the Democratic Socialists of America, whose job it was to facilitate cooperation between the Syracuse Democratic Socialists of America and other local activist organizations.
Wow.
Is that information unfounded? So we showed all of this in this report, and our call at the end was to remind the bishops that their role as shepherds is to protect the faithful from the flesh, the world, and the devil. But it seems that the CCHD is intent upon financing the enemies of the church and of souls. And the way that I ended it here, I said, we beseech you, please consider an independent third-party investigation of CCHD grants. Don't just take our word for it. Hire an institution trusted by the USCCB, like the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Have them examine our reports and determine whether they are unfounded or not. And then I also asked them to withhold their support for the CCHD until that kind of investigation takes place.
What, like, do you think someone's like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around exactly why would any bishop be like, I'm married to these organizations, we have got to keep funding them? Like, any report like this, of this nature, of this gravitude, the charges being leveled here, you'd think these bishops are like, I don't know who these people really are. Like, we should probably look into this. Like, I'm not married to these organizations. I have no idea who these people really are. And these charges are very serious. We should look into it. But instead, they just ignore it all. You would think, I mean, how married are you to these organizations then, if you won't even look into them? Do you get what I'm saying here? It's like, it seems bizarre to me on a smell test kind of a way to go, well, they must be pretty connected to these groups if they're willing to defend them to this level.
Well, that really is kind of my thinking. Many of these bishops, I think, are very much wedded to supporting these Marxist organizations because they're ideologically attached.
And that should give pause to just every Catholic out there, no matter where you find yourself on the spectrum, politically, ideologically, theologically. You ought to be concerned because, you know, maybe you're on the opposite side of the equation from us, and maybe you're more liberal, and you're like, why do they like these people? But what if the tables were turned? How would you feel then? You wouldn't want bishops being married to organizations that you didn't believe in. So just on principle alone, every Catholic should be concerned about this, let alone the fact that these organizations really do purport and support evil things that we, of course, are objected to and don't want our hard-earned donor dollars to be supporting. So it is a travesty, it is a scandal, and it just doesn't pass the smell test in general. But yet here we are. Here we are dealing with it. Let me ask you this, Michael Hichborn. When Bishop Strickland was the bishop of Tyler, Texas, was he responsive to your reports? Did he support you? Did he take any action in a positive direction in his diocese?
100%. I was in regular communication with Bishop Strickland, and I gave him the information that I had on CCHD, also Catholic Relief Services. He took that information very seriously. He personally examined the evidence. He went through all of the information. He asked questions. And he said that the CCHD up in Washington, D.C. gave him the same blanket non-committal responses that they give to the general public. So, he got the same treatment that the rest of us did.
Wow. Let that sink in, everybody. Hey, make sure to go to lepantoin.org. We're going to put links to the open letter as well as to the website lepantoin.org in the show notes today. But Michael Hichborn from Lepanto Institute, always a pleasure to have you on. Once again, thank you for being on the team and pitching in while I was out. And we do appreciate all the hard work you and Lepanto Institute have done to shed light into this evil that goes on in our society. God bless you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
thestationofthecross.com/ACT is where the show notes are going to exist today. thestationofthecross.com/ACT. We'll be right back. Dr. Anthony Stine is on the team. We're talking about Bishop Strickland fired for not implementing Traditionis custodes and the growing list of bishops who've been canceled. We'll be right back.
My name is Nathan Wigfield, Executive Director of the St. Thomas More House of Prayer, a Catholic retreat center in Cranberry, Pennsylvania, with the mission of praying and promoting the Liturgy of the Hours. Our goal is to help people experience the Liturgy of the Hours and discover the prayer that will change their life. The Catholic Church teaches us that the Liturgy of the Hours is the prayer that Christ himself, together with his body, addresses to the Father, and that its purpose is to sanctify each day in the whole range of human activity. That means every time we pray this prayer, our relationship with Christ is deepened. We are united to the faithful of every time and place, and our entire day and work are made holy unto the Lord. To learn more about the prayer of the Church, please visit liturgyofthehours.org or call our retreat center at 814-676-1910.
Father Willie Doyle, an Irish Jesuit priest, known for his joy even in the face of war. His courage made him legendary. His compassion made him beloved. Father Willie gave his life on the battlefield of World War I, insisting that he be with his men. Now his cause for canonization has been opened. To find out more about this man of heroic virtue, visit the Willie Doyle Association at www.williedoyle.org.
The Station of the Cross has many ways to keep you informed about our programming. You can view the highlights of our primetime programming schedule or the full 24/7 programming grid at both thestationofthecross.com or the free iCatholic Radio app. Just search under the Programming tab. Our website also offers a printable version for your convenience.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and here are your headline news. LifeSite News reports Bishop Strickland says U.S. Nuncio told him not to attend the USCCB annual meeting. Despite the fact that Bishop Emeritus can attend the USCCB meetings, Bishop Strickland told John Henry Weston that the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States, Cardinal Christophe Pierre, explicitly asked Strickland not to attend the U.S. Bishops' meeting in Baltimore this week. Instead, Bishop Strickland led a rosary with hundreds of Catholics at the waterfront side of the hotel where the bishops were gathered for their meetings. Breitbart reports George Santos says he won't seek re-election after scathing ethics report. Bishop George Santos of New York said Thursday he would not seek re-election after the House Ethics Committee found evidence that he engaged in fraud. The committee's report said it found substantial evidence that Santos knowingly caused his campaign to file false or incomplete reports with the Federal Election Commission, used campaign funds for personal purposes, and willfully violated the Ethics in Government Act related to his House financial disclosure statement, among other offenses. And Catholic Vote is reporting FBI probes satanic pedophiles. The FBI is finally investigating a satanic pedophilic gang that has long blackmailed and exhorted minors to harm themselves and generate child pornography. The FBI's primary reason for investigating the group came only when the agency alleged that one of the gang members is a white supremacist. Also, parents and faith leaders in Lebanon, Connecticut are outraged that Satanists are planning an after-school Satan club for elementary school children in their town beginning December the 1st. Which begs the question, if Christ were the king, would he tolerate an after-school Satan club? No, he wouldn't, and neither should we. And those are your headline news. Praise be to God. Hey, last night, Bishop Strickland was on the World Over Live program. Let me play a clip for you. I think it's very, very telling.
He didn't mention a single administrative concern that I heard. He did mention a lack of fraternity with my brother bishops, which I think is basically comes down to a lack of, I'm speaking up and they're not. So that was one thing. The fact that I didn't implement Traditionis custodes, I basically didn't not implement, I just didn't respond. We have a few Latin masses, and as I said, I felt like I couldn't deprive that portion of the flock of the nourishment they were receiving.
Sounds synodality to me. Sounds like we're discipling, accompanying, being merciful, smelling like the sheep. But apparently not so much the Vatican these days. We've invited Dr. Anthony Stine from Return to Tradition to be on the program to weigh in. Good morning to you, Dr. Stine.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me back on your show.
Sounds to me like Bishop Strickland is getting the same treatment as the bishop in Puerto Rico. Very similar. He didn't really lay the hammer on Traditionis custodes. He wasn't having collegiality with his brother bishops, and he also didn't implement the jab, which was something that came up last night with Bishop Strickland and Raymond Rory as well. What say you, Dr. Stine?
Bishop Strickland is just the latest in a long line, and he won't be the last, as I'll be reporting on my channel tomorrow. There's something happening in France right now with a bishop. There's religious orders being getting apostolic visitations in ways that, if you are familiar with how almost always traditional or just sometimes conservative religious orders are getting visitations from Rome, what almost always happens, which is that they get shut down, their nuns scattered as a community to other religious orders that are much more, we'll say, in line with the current zeitgeist in much of the church. Instead of being traditional or very conservative, they, traditional appearing religious who wear habits and keep the actual old disciplines and often are dedicated to the old form of the liturgy will find themselves in religious communities where if they wear the habits at all, they wear them only for Mass. Otherwise, you may bump into one at the grocery store dressed like you or I, and you would never even know unless you knew them personally.
Yeah.
And this has happened quite a lot. And I've got a list here of bishops, and I've sent the article to your producer, by the way, but if you want to look at it, but it's an Italian news site, so it's in Italian, and it does leave off at least a couple of these bishops who are canceled. But it's the most comprehensive that I've seen of any of them.
Really? Wow. We'll be sure to include that in the show notes today, thestationofthecross.com/ACT. But I think a lot of Catholics are missing this point. There is a growing list of bishops that are finding themselves retired with no assignments. If you can give us the lowdown, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, the one that they don't include is Archbishop Vigano.
Yes.
Who was essentially removed as apostolic nuncio after he introduced Kim Davis to Francis. Do you remember back when he introduced Kim Davis to Pope Francis?
I talked about this yesterday in our after show. I interviewed Archbishop Vigano on my radio program back in those days. I interviewed him just as he was packing up to vacate the nunciature in D.C. And I remember scheduling the interview with his assistant, and I forget that priest's name. And I remember this priest saying something very cryptically to me, and it went straight over my head, and I didn't pay any attention. I didn't connect any dots whatsoever. Complete numbskull opportunity on my part, because he said, you do know His Holiness has dismissed him, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay, and like he was like, well, Are you sure you want to talk to him? I'm like, yes, of course I want to talk to him. Like, it was just such a naive moment in my life. I really missed the boat on that one. Mm-hmm. But I remember thinking at the time, like, oh, I don't understand what the big deal is. Maybe he's he's retired or it's his time. I, like most Catholics, didn't see the significance of that moment. It was only later when you can start to look back and go, oh my heavens, this guy was canceled because he did something the Pope didn't agree to. And it was all politics. It wasn't theology at the time.
Right. So that their list does not include Archbishop Vigano. But here we have an article that is where they actually, on the Italian website, they are publishing someone else's article, and they found some names that weren't included. And so we are adding, of course, Vigano to this list. So it's several. And there's Monsignor Mario Oliveri from the Bishop of Albenga Imperia, which I'm not sure where a lot of these places are, full disclosure, but he was placed under commissioner by Pope Francis at the age of 72, which means that somebody else was running his diocese and he'd become essentially a figurehead of his diocese. Mm-hmm. There's Archbishop Morandi, secretary of the then CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. He was dismissed even though he was his 5-year term was not up, and he was sent to become a bishop of a small diocese. He was an archbishop sent to an actual diocese, not an archdiocese. So he had a job, but this was, he hadn't quite angered anybody enough, I guess. But he hadn't gone along with the program because the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith's job, their key task, is to preserve the integrity of the faith, both against priests who were acting like Ted McCarrick will say, or also to prevent error from rising up within the church, because that's been a problem, Yes. Another one is Monsignor Matteo Visioli. He was the undersecretary for the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith. He was sent to be a parish priest somewhere, okay?
Wow.
This is, a Monsignor sent to be a parish priest in the Apennines. Like, here, go be a priest in the most rural parish we can find. Then he had Cardinal Stella, who had been, briefly been at least looked at to be prefect for the Congregation for the Clergy, but after the end of his 5-year period, he wasn't given an assignment. And they have an article about that there if anybody's curious. There's Monsignor Jorge Carlos Patron Wong, secretary for the seminaries of the Congregation for the Clergy. He had been, I believe, working with Cardinal Stella in 2013 and then terminated. There's been a controversial audience. Again, go back to Vigano with that. And that helped earn him the he and Cardinal Stella being terminated. There was also Cardinal Piacenza, prefect for the clergy in 2010, who had been fired prematurely in September 2013 after only 3 of his 5 years in office.
Wow.
There was Archbishop Monsignor Pozzo from the president of a Pontifical Commission of Ecclesia Dei, downgraded to Monsignor. He'd been an archbishop and downgraded at the age of 72. Then Bishop Monsignor Derek Cole, Bishop of Ascoli Piceno, forced to resign at just 73. Remember, 75 is when they're required to turn in their resignation letter. But there are plenty of times that popes have just kept the letter in a drawer and had the bishop in question keep going for several years. There's also Cardinal Sarah, whose resignation he accepted as soon as he turned 75. Okay, Cardinal Sarah had been, do you remember, Joe, which congregation he had been in charge of? I don't remember offhand, but it
wasn't it liturgy?
I believe it was liturgy, yes. And I remember right after he turned 75, weeks after he had issued something praising the traditional liturgy and talking about errors that we have in the ordinary form of the liturgy, and at least in how it's offered in many dioceses, a lot of the liturgical abuse. He was let go right after that. Here's another one. This one should be familiar for anybody who has bought the probably most controversial book published this year in Catholic circles, and that's Monsignor Gonswein. He had been serving as the personal secretary for a time to both Benedict and Francis, but then Pope Francis sent him to go work full-time with Benedict, and then he was sent away with no assignment. He's currently essentially being an unofficial auxiliary bishop in a diocese somewhere. And by unofficial, I mean there's a bishop who's given him shelter and sends him to do things occasionally, and that's it. He has no official role anywhere. And that's just what this Italian article at Mason Latino added to this other one. So you got Monsignor Hector Aguirre, who is the Archbishop of La Plata. I had in my live stream I did on my channel this morning, he's been doing the series of letters on a sort of a state of the church kind of thing. And I had his most recent one this morning in my live stream. He is a bishop who, before Pope Francis became Pope Francis, he had been on the opposite end of the ideological spectrum from Hector Aguirre, and they had battled back and forth many times. And as soon as he hit 75, he was gone, just gone. And then there's the Paraguayan bishop Rogelio Ricardo Liveras Plano, deprived of his diocese while he was in Rome. He was visiting Rome and lost his diocese.
Wow.
He had enjoyed personal favor with John Paul II, too, to give you an idea how drastically things changed in just a decade. And then, of course, you had Monsignor Daniel Fernandez Torres, at just 57 years old, sent into retirement 18 years early. Okay. He was guilty of not sending his they had been told by Rome to close all their seminaries, and except for one, a very, very progressive modernist seminary, and everybody was supposed to send in Puerto Rico all their seminarians there. He refused. He apparently didn't go as far with Traditionis custodes as some liked, and of course he didn't go down the jab road either. That's why he is being compared mostly to Bishop Strickland. There's so much in common there, and he has no job. He appeared at some event recently, but I think he was in his clerics, the sort of the more contemporary bishop's attire. But beyond that, he has nothing, no official role in anything. Yeah. In 2014, Francis got rid of Monsignor Michel Apoti, a former doctor and bioethics expert. He was the Archbishop of Paris, and then he sacked him. And then you've got, of course, Cardinal Burke in 2014. He had been prefect for the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, and then sent over to be the patron of the Sovereign Order at Malta at the age of 66, which is unusual to be that young. But even more unusual, he got there and everything was being done by other people. There was a big controversy there. They tried to blame on Cardinal Burke. And he said the first time he heard about the controversy was when he was actually having to deal with officials in Rome about the controversy.
Wow.
And then, of course, Cardinal Mueller.
Hold that thought. We'll pick up right there with Cardinal Mueller, whom I got to hang out with in Rome. His very interesting statements while I was there. Of course, Bishop Strickland's statements there have been used as a sledgehammer against him. Something I addressed back on Monday, and something he addressed last night with Raymond Arroyo specifically. We're going to link to that, plus this list that Dr. Anthony Stine is providing to us on our show notes, but we encourage you to check out his website, returntotradition.org. returntotradition.org. Again, we're going to put links to everything in the show notes at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. But it's a long list, a very interesting list. Golly gee whiz, did he fire the bishop in Chile? Oh, wait, he tried to protect him for the longest time. And there are many others that he's protected as well. It seems like a big contrast. More on that coming up after the break. Don't go anywhere.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for November 17th. Today we celebrate Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. A queen may be an unlikely person to be known for her love for the poor and suffering, but that's who Elizabeth of Hungary was and why the common people treasured her in 13th century Hungary. The daughter of Hungary's king, Elizabeth was married to Louis Thuringia at age 14. It was a happy union that produced 3 children. Under the spiritual direction of a Franciscan, she led a life of prayer, sacrifice, and service to the poor and sick. She wore simple clothing and each day fed the hundreds of poor people who came to the royal gates. After 6 years of marriage, Elizabeth lost her husband in the Crusades. Although grief-stricken, Louis's family expelled her from the palace, claiming that she'd squandered Louis's fortune. Eventually restored to her rightful position, she became a secular Franciscan and spent the remaining few years of her short life caring for the poor in a hospital that she founded and dedicated to St. Francis. Elizabeth died in 1231 before her 24th birthday and was canonized 4 years later. She is the patron of Catholic Charities and of the secular Franciscan order. There's more about the saints along with inspiration and Catholic resources at our website, saintoftheday.org. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
Download the app to take our programming with you wherever you go. Hear what listeners are saying about the regularly updated iCatholic Radio app.
The programs on iCatholic Radio are uplifting, educational, and have served to deepen my faith as a Catholic. Thank you for this amazing station.
Download the free iCatholic Radio app in your Android or Apple store today. If you already have the app, please consider giving us a 5-star review or telling a friend about it.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Dr. Anthony Stine is our guest from Return to Tradition YouTube channel, but also returntotradition.org, a channel that I'm always watching. He's got some of the most interesting, sources that he pulls from that you're just not going to find just about anywhere else. And he's been going through a list of bishops who've been canceled. They have been retired, or so in some cases, almost 20 years too early. But it looks like a clear agenda here. Welcome back to the program, Dr. Stine. You left off with Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, somebody that he upsets a lot of folks these days because he speaks so clearly and is outspoken. Yet he can't count him as a rad trad. He's never been a rad trad. He's been a modernist for the most of his career, but he's level-headed. He's not bombastic. He's very sober, and he's very qualified as well. What say you, Dr. Stine?
There are people who will remind me angrily in my comments sometimes that Cardinal Mueller is the author of a book on liberation theology, co-written with a liberation theologian, and that he gifted a copy of it to Father James Martin at the Synod.
Yes.
So I remind people that who are looking for much more deeper traditional orthodoxy in a future pontiff, that Mueller's probably not the man you're going to want because you'll be disappointed. But at the same time, I think he is an effective voice against many of the things we're seeing now because he is a moderate. And as I personally am not a moderate, but the one thing moderates have going for them is that people are more willing to listen to them. They're not as easy to dismiss based on our own ideological biases. And that's why I like Cardinal Mueller. I am personally more inclined to with the Bishop Athanasius Schneider of the world, partially because he's willing to go places with his critique of the problems in the church right now and much of the sources going back 60 years that many others are not willing to. He's willing to admit that there were problems in some of those Vatican II documents. He's, he also angers people because he won't touch certain hot button issues that a lot of people want him to go to. But it's interesting with Cardinal Mueller that he was dismissed because at the age of 69, his term as the prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith ended. And Pope Francis didn't give him another job, meaning he was functionally retired. So there are like degrees of how this happens, right? Some of these bishops are sent to go be, the ordinary for a diocese. That is a demotion. Yes, you're an archbishop, but you are now a bishop of a diocese, right? Others are, some of them have been demoted from being bishops to priests. Many of their personal secretaries were sent to the most remote parishes possible. But a lot of them were just not given jobs. And it does, you begin to wonder if maybe they should, form an informal network among themselves to provide assistance, because there are innumerable canceled priests out there.
Wasn't that what Vigano did? Didn't Vigano create a network?
That's where I was about to bring back to Vigano. Archbishop Vigano, after several years of mostly writing letters and making the occasional internet appearance somewhere, people were publicly asking him to do something more than write letters. And so he founded an organization called Exsurge Domine, which is at first an Italian organization to help traditional priests dedicated to the traditional sacraments and the traditional form of the Mass who had been canceled by their bishops in Italy, to make it so that they had some kind of a bishop to work with and some, resources and things, so they could offer Mass and the sacraments to people who wanted them. He then launched this year, just a few months ago, the American branch of that. So there's one in Italy and one in the United States. And of course, this brings up some obvious questions. Should some bishops, certain recently canceled American bishops, go and associate themselves with that? I've had people say that, yes, Bishop Strickland should do that. Now, and while I would maybe be inclined to agree with that, I'm happy to see that he's focusing himself first on prayer and then letting the prayer lead to the action that he's going to take. My only hope is that Vigano has contacted, the SSPX at this point and said, look, how is it you are maintaining reasonably decent relations with Rome, not being in schism, even though you're canonically in sort of limbo, which is essentially their official stance? And how are you doing this? Because Archbishop Vigano is not a young man anymore.
Yeah.
There needs to be, if you're going to support these multitudes of canceled traditional priests, there needs to be a network of support for them until such a time as the bishops might be inclined to, call these priests back and welcome them in their dioceses. It's really weird that you're seeing this happen too at a time when it's well known that there are not a lot of priests don't want to accept offers of promotions to become auxiliary bishops and then ordinaries of dioceses. And so I'm sure they have somebody in mind for Tyler, Texas, but at the same time, I would not be surprised if next spring we're still talking about who's going to replace Bishop Strickland.
Yeah. I'm sure there's not going to be a mad rush. And, I met Bishop Strickland when he was first named. He was a Monsignor, and he had not yet been consecrated a bishop. And I sat down with him, and I remember the look in his eyes. It was just like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. It had that look and appeal when I first met him. And then, he was, red pilled, white pill, black pill. I don't know what color pill it was, but he took a pill and he woke up along the way. And he was really lamenting the fact that he would be judged someday if he didn't take his office very, very seriously. And the rest is, as they say, history. But I want to go back to something we kind of touched on at the end of the last segment, and that is what I call the canary in the coal mines. Again, you can pull out anybody you like, Dr. Taylor Marshall. You can pull out Kennedy Hall or Vigano or Schneider. You can pull out a lot of people that the other side of the equation, they're going to be like, oh, those are rad trads. Those are crazy people. They just talk about crazy things. They just hate the Pope. They'll say all kinds of things about that. I don't think you can make that statement about Dr. Ralph Martin. I don't think you can make that statement about Dr. Scott Hahn. I don't think you can make that statement about a lot of people. And I do include, to your point a minute ago, I do include Cardinal Mueller in that category. What would you say to that? I mean, I think it's a red flag. And I think every Catholic should pay attention to the fact that Dr. Ralph Martin is speaking out. I mean, he is your middle road, go along to get along seminarian professor for decades now. He's not a rad trad. He was a charismatic. He's not a crazy person. He doesn't hate the papacy or the church in any way, shape, or form. And he is speaking out about it. That should be a red flag for just about everybody.
The one that was for me was when Scott Hahn started hinting at things. I was at that point, it was that should have been for a lot of people who are either actively avoiding confronting things going on in the church right now, or who are suspicious of those of us who are maybe take a more strident position than many people are comfortable with. That should have been the red flag, because Scott Hahn is, I've never met the man, but he seems to be like one of the most nicest, charitable men you'll ever see. I get that from watching his addresses, and some traditional Catholics have issues with some theological positions he takes. I don't know. I don't trouble myself with that. I just know that when you lose somebody who is practically universally loved, there's a problem.
Yes.
And I recently saw somebody going after Steve Ray in that same way.
Sure. Yes.
Because Steve Ray at one point shared an article or as part of a speech or something from Father Altman, where Father Altman was saying things that were against the secular religion of social justice. And immediately he got dragged through the mud. Steve Ray. Okay.
Steve Ray.
If you've listened to
Steve Ray.
Someone who works for bringing people to the faith and leads pilgrimages in the Holy Land.
Right.
About as inoffensive as a public figure in the church as you're going to find.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's where we're at. And I've worked with both Scott Hahn personally and Steve Ray personally on a number of occasions. And I can tell you from personal experience, time spent with them privately, that they are, as you describe, good people, well-meaning Catholics. They're that middle of the road and have not a harmful bone in their body. But when they are speaking out, I think every Catholic should go, oh, that's a red flag. That's definitely a red flag. You don't have to go all the way to Taylor Marshall's infiltration. You can stop right at Steve Ray, Dr. Ralph Martin, Scott Hahn, and dare I say Cardinal Mueller, and there's a bunch of others. They're not alone. That's just a representative category there that I think we ought to pay attention to. But that music means we're out of time on the radio side. Dr. Anthony Stine, if you can hang out for the after show, we'd love to have you. But either way, we're grateful that you were here today. Check out returntotradition.org. And also go to his YouTube channel if you're not already. I'm sure you are, but we subscribe. We would like you to as well. We'll put a link in the show notes at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. God bless you. God love you. And we'll see you on the Insider email list.
So what did you think of today's show? Let's discuss that right now in the after show. Your take on the after take. Comment, interact live with me and the team. All you need to do is search for one of our live video feeds on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, LinkedIn, and elsewhere. Simply search for the Station of the Cross, Joe McClain, or A Catholic Take. I'm looking forward to seeing you and interacting with you directly. It all starts right now. It's the after show.
And we are back. Welcome to the after show, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. I found my ACT Insider mug, by the way. It was hiding in our cupboard. Someone stuffed it away while I was in Rome, and I couldn't. For the last week, I kept forgetting to look for it, and finally pulled it out this morning. So it's good to have it back.
I've been enjoying coffee. I've been enjoying coffee during my live streams, mostly out of my Jaws mug. It started becoming kind of a joke when I was doing a live stream about Father Rupnik, and how charity requires innocence until proven guilty as a presumption. But at the same time, but this is what I really think of him as I'm sitting there drinking out of my Jaws movie poster mug. It's because the guy is if he's not the quintessential predator priest, because I think that honorific belongs to the Maciels and the Carricks of the world. He's like half a step below, because I cannot bring myself to say the things that he forced nuns to do. I can't. It's not just I don't want to get demonetized on YouTube. I just can't bring myself to say it.
Last night, Strickland he said a lot of things last night I thought was very fascinating. So we're going to link to that.
Yeah, I actually watched it. I watched about half of it before we went live this morning.
He talked about
only half because a friend called.
He talked about how a lot of bishops are still intimately connected to the McCarrick scandal, and they still have their dioceses. Let that sink in for you. So, so I know that there's a lot of people and various stages of the spectrum, philosophically, theologically, politically. Not everybody who watches my show loves my show. Clearly, some people don't, and that's fair. That's fine. If I got an opinion, you can have your opinion too. I'm all right with that. But my argument is this: I'm the common sense smell test kind of a guy. I'm not a theologian, not a philosopher. I'm not a Thomist. I'm a knuckle dragger, and it's always about the common sense smell test. It doesn't pass the smell test that Rupnik gets his excommunication lifted, gets assigned to a parish in Slovakia or wherever he is, Slovenia. I don't even know where he is, but he's somewhere in Eastern Europe, and he gets to continue on all of his glory after he molested women religious, and they complained to the Holy Father about it.
And he not only did he force himself on women religious, he then used his sacramental authority to absolve them of their sins, which automatically earned him excommunication.
Right.
For
he
good
gets
reason.
a pass. He gets a pass. But Strickland
this
doesn't.
This was announced weeks before Strickland was canned, meaning they were planning to do this.
It's bizarre.
It's unbelievable.
I think every Catholic, no matter where you're at, you should look at that situation and go, that doesn't pass the smell test. If we're going to be honest, if we're going to be sincere and fair and honest, we have to say that doesn't pass the smell test, right? Or like how His Holiness tried to protect the bishop in Chile, who everybody's like, no, this guy's a criminal. This guy's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Stop protecting him. He doubled and tripled down. And finally, he had to acquiesce because it became too darn obvious to continue to protect this guy. But he is just one of several examples of bishops and cardinals who have enjoyed the protection of the Holy See when everyone else knew that they were wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, talking everyone else knew it. Go to Argentina. Ask around how people like Francis there. See what they say. Go ahead, Stine.
There's a reason he hasn't been back, although he's likely to go back next year, they say. But do you remember a couple of years ago, maybe this was before the pandemic, there was that gay activist, I think he wrote a book that claims that something like 80% of the bishops in the Vatican are gay. You remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
And it was one of those, you shouldn't take somebody like that word at face value, but at the same time, it would explain a lot, wouldn't it? Like it would explain an extraordinary amount of things in the Vatican, in the USCCB. I mean, how long did it take after Cardinal Bernardin died that the stuff that he was alleged to be involved with started coming out? Making Malachi Martin look like a prophet, by the way.
Exactly, yes.
I mean,
where's
Rob?
Where's Flying Tigers when we need them most?
Yeah, you see in the chat today?
I don't see Rob in the chat today.
No, if Rob was in the chat, you'd want to get him here.
Yeah.
Rob is amazing. We've had him on the show. We're going to get him back. He's given us some amazing insights into Malachi Martin. And he's another one that I often refer to when I talk about the scandals in the church from a knuckle dragger's perspective, the smell test perspective.
Folks,
he says he's here.
Good morning, Rob.
Rob is actually has a film documentary about Malachi Martin, or was a part of it on YouTube that you can pay like $5 or something to rent. Hostage of the Devil, I think is what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've rented it. And we do encourage everybody to check it out for sure. We did a couple of shows based on that. I interviewed Rob, was one of them. And then Ralph Sarchi was the other one that I interviewed on that subject. You know, Malachi Martin is a great man of mystery. And Rob is probably one of the last people on planet Earth that can unravel the mystery of Father Malachi Martin. And very intriguing to say the least.
His book needs to happen because weirdly, right after he published a book called The Jesuits, which later he could have called, Malachi Martin said could have been called The Religious Orders, was a book that outed the Jesuits and every other religious order basically as having been corrupted by a Sado mafia. And like if you read, like everybody goes to Windswept House, and I always say there are other books in his that you should read before you finish with that one. But in Windswept House, he shows the Dominicans acting exactly the way he describes the Jesuits and the Jesuits. So
I like the Jesuits. I read the Jesuits and my mind was blown. I got into a conversation with all of a sudden my brain froze. Father, what's his Jesuit? What's his name at EWTN?
Father McTeague. He's one of my favorite.
No, not him.
Okay,
not him.
One of my favorite figures in there.
Yep. Thank you, Father Mitch Pacwa. I got into a conversation with Father Mitch Pacwa.
Those are my two go-to Jesuits to say there is something to rebuild off of. You know, it doesn't. It's not all Pastor Jimmy Martin and Thomas Reese's. There's more. Well, Thomas Reese isn't a Jesuit, I think, but.
What I wanted to say was when I got into a conversation, private conversation with Father Mitch Pacwa, and I like Father Mitch Pacwa, by the way.
I remember bringing up Malachi Martin and the Jesuits, and the look on his face was priceless. They are trained. They are trained to have an adverse reaction to anything Malachi Martin. And it's just kind of funny. But at the same time, whenever I bring that book up, I always go, but you don't listen. You don't like Father Malachi Martin. You don't like him. Fine, fair enough. Just go read George Weigel's The End and the Beginning, because he agrees with Malachi Martin. They are parallel. Yeah. The story that George Weigel, Mr. Middle of the Road, professional Catholic think tank
Mr.
guy.
JP2 moderate, yeah.
Yeah. You read his accounts, and then you compare it to the Jesuits, and you're like, it's almost as if they collaborated on the notes here. I mean, let that blow your mind.
That's why when Malachi Martin published that book, he got a Rob in the chat, you can confirm this if I'm getting this correct or not, but he apparently was warned by somebody close to him that if you publish this book, they will try to destroy you. And mysteriously, he publishes the Jesuits claim on the basis that he felt he had a duty to tell the truth about what happened to the best and brightest in the church. And lo and behold, he gets accused of adultery. He gets accused of all sorts of just evil things. Yeah. And those who knew him personally could tell you that he was utterly mystified by this stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why that book needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to get Rob back on the show. He's working on Rob knew him personally, talked to him almost every day, I imagine, and he's trying to write a book about his time with Malachi Martin, what he knows about Father Malachi Martin, and he's trying to get that done. So he's got a little fundraiser to help with the cost of producing a book that will get widespread delivery. So make sure to check out Rob's efforts in that.
Even if you have a publisher, unless you're a Stephen King, James Patterson level writer,
exactly.
you're good luck. That's why the bookstores are usually very, the number of authors there are fewer names you would find in a phone book in a big bookstore.
By the way, which reminds me from a strategy perspective, I've been in Catholic professional work now for 20 years, basically 20 years. I'm going on 20 years. And the one thing I've learned most in all that time, and I've worked personally with Scott Hahn and all of the biggest names, Father Carapi, we did that. So I've had a lot of experience working with a lot of people. The one lesson I've learned most in all of that time is distribution rules the day. Mm-hmm. You can get a lot of people who have clear voices or powerful messages or impactful teaching. You can find that. That's a skill you can find more readily available. What you can't find more readily available is Catholics who have the ability to be able to distribute those messages to a wider audience. And when you do find that skill, it's usually relegated to the world of Sikh, the world of Steubenville. I'm not trashing those worlds. I'm not. Don't get me wrong here. What I'm saying is they are sort of that middle road, go along to get along, type of category. And I do find that there's a need for those. Don't get me wrong here. My point is there needs to be the ability to reach the masses. This is St. Maximilian Kolbe. And he realized this lesson, well, I guess I've got to do this myself. He had to roll up his habit and go figure out how to create a radio network, how to fly an airplane and distribute his copies of The Night in multiple languages, and then go to Japan and rinse and repeat, and then go to India and rinse and repeat. Well, that's kind of the focus of what I'm doing and the Station of the Cross is doing, and that's why Anthony Stine's work is so important, because he has found a way to leverage a platform to reach many hundreds of thousands of people with information they're never going to get anywhere else. Distribution is the need of the day.
I have been thinking about this too, because the one thing I expected when I started having some success on YouTube was that a lot of other people would jump in under this, because I'd paid attention to numerous other niches on YouTube over the years. And when people start getting big on there, other people jump in. And that didn't happen in Catholic commentary.
Yeah, no.
I don't know why that is. Yeah, there have been a few small channels they didn't take off, but no, you might be the most recent person on YouTube, and because you do put some YouTube exclusive things on, don't you? I mean, it's not all just.
Yeah, we do. But I've actually been doing YouTube for way longer, and I've been on the platform since 2008, and in 2014. But I've had multiple channels and different approaches and things. But in 2014, after putting videos up since 2008, under the moniker of the Catholic Hack. So I used to do, I started podcasting in 2005. And in 2007, I started the Catholic Hack. And it was apologetics primarily. And so I created a YouTube channel called The Catholic Hack, and I started uploading. But it was potpourri, didn't understand it, no rhyme or no reason. I was throwing up content that I was working with Scott Hahn and Brian Petrie and all these professors. I was doing all this work with them, so I would put videos up like that. It was just kind of all over the road. In 2014, I made the decision, you know what? I'm going to figure this thing out. I need to figure out how YouTube actually works. How does one actually build an audience on the platform? So at that point, I made a decision that I would experiment with trying to reach beyond the masses, trying to get beyond the choir. And I decided I was going to use a banal topic, and that was traditional archery. So I used traditional archery as a means by which to reverse engineer YouTube. And then I began to create content, and I began to figure out how it all works. And then I began to grow an audience, a worldwide audience who loves traditional archery. I still shared my faith, but it was based around traditional archery, because grown men don't shoot bows with training wheels. I'm just going to say that out loud. Real men shoot trad archery. I will tell you
this. I'm a patron of the Tumbler House podcast. That's Charles Colon and Vincent Franchini's podcast. Mm-hmm. And one of their episodes, I don't know if it was one of their patron-only sort of bonus things they do or if it was on their regular one. This was a couple years ago, and it stuck with me that he says, Vincent Franchini said there needs to be more implicitly Catholic content. Not so much more Taylor Marshall and Return to Tradition stuff, but more, where
Catholic
people
culture.
Doing normal things. Yeah. And it's, even if it's like very mundane stuff that's broadly appealable to normal people, but you're not hiding your faith, but it's also not like, you're not doing apologetics either.
And that's what I learned that through my traditional archery effort. And that's what I was going to point out is once I figured out like a formula, I experimented by creating a brand new channel, 0 subs, no history whatsoever. And then I was able to take that to 5,000 subs like almost overnight because the formula worked. And so I discovered how to leverage the algorithm. And then in the process, what I also discovered was, I could be like, people would complain to me in the chat box, Joe, I love your archery videos. They're so helpful to me. They're so well done. If you could just never mention God, that would be better. And my response would be, there's no chance of that ever happening. I don't even tie my shoes unless I'm trying to give God glory. Like I shoot my bow for the glory of God. And if you don't like that, you should go elsewhere and never come back because I'm going to be who I am. And in the process, what I learned was, and it kind of ties into some of the Pope-splainers today and how YouTube actually works. What I learned was the more people hated me, the more my channel would grow. And
funny how that works, isn't it?
It is. And YouTube loves it if you fan the flame of discord. YouTube's algorithm loves it when you stir the pot and cause angst. YouTube doesn't care if you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The action itself generates a response, and that's what they want to know. And they are just as happy to promote stuff that stirs the pot like they promote, like, say, Bin Laden's letters, things like that. They love it when you stir the pot. So, there's an algorithm, and if you play the algorithm, you'll grow. You will grow, and you can even earn a lot of money on the platform. But you get stuck into this vicious cycle. And this is the other point I was going to make was I learned these lessons and I was sharing my faith with non-Catholics. And I was routinely discussing the faith with non-Catholics through my archery videos. And I learned a very powerful lesson that if we could do literally anything, any topic was on the table, gardening for the greater glory of God, sowing for the greater glory of God. It literally wouldn't matter what the subject matter was, so long as you did it for the glory of God and you were not afraid to share your faith through that common thing that everybody loves, whatever that community loves, then amazing things could happen because you would reach beyond the choir and you could plant seeds. And so I tried to take those lessons and apply them to the direct work that I was doing in the faith, apologetics, conferences, and Catholic media that I was involved in over those many years. And so I've been on YouTube a long time, and I've done various efforts on YouTube a long time. The one that I'm doing now is the most explicit that I've done that's also growing the fastest. And that's because the day and the age that we live in, as you well know, is a dark and confused one, and people are desperate for clarity. And that's the reality. But to your point...
here's a bit of a black pill on this, though. You know what it is?
What's that?
my most important videos are the ones I do Saturday and Sunday mornings that are the writings of saints and popes and teachers of the faith from before the council. They're also the videos of mine that get the least views on YouTube.
Jake,
the drop
are we
down
here?
is not,
this is something Jake and I talk about all the time.
The drop down rate on those are 90%, 90% compared to anything else. Now, my show is also available on Spotify and other things, and I can go look at the Spotify's central hub where they send it out to the competing podcasts as well. And the drop rate from my normal news episodes to those is only like 40% on the audio side.
Yeah,
and I find that fascinating.
Not surprised.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah,
it's a bit of blackpilling to me because every year during Lent, people will, you'll see about a 10% drop on your views because people abstain from social media. Although I actually never understood completely, like checking out completely. Like it seems like the last couple of years, some of the worst news in the church happens during Lent. And then people come back and they're like, they haven't heard anything about it. And they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean? Like, there's a, my priest is being forced to bless gay marriages or whatever, I mean, that's frankly, not to get like out there with it, but it's like, this is what happens, folks. But I always suggest, maybe you should moderate how much you consume of that stuff and replace some of it with, Census of Dalium or some of the weekend stuff I do or other places. There's no shortage of that stuff on YouTube. But there's also the other thing. There is the other thing though. Yes, stirring the pot will get you views, but there is a limit to it. I got, the Diamond Brothers took umbrage with me about 2 years ago, right? They put up a hit piece on me.
Wait, what? Really? I'm shocked. I'm shocked the Diamond Brothers would target someone. I'm shocked.
Because I go on to Tradcat Night's show, they accuse me of doing the stuff that they accuse him of doing. I don't know. They also didn't like some stuff I said about them on Twitter, and I guess that's fair. But one of the things they said was they didn't understand why my show gets as many views as it does when they get fewer views. And I'm like, and their growth had slowed. Have you ever watched the Diamond Brothers video? I have. I've watched a few, and I can answer the question for why. I'm going to put it bluntly because we're in the green room, and you're not going to lose advertisers on radio, and as far as I know, we're not on YouTube. But
no, we are on YouTube. But it's okay. You can say it. I'm not as careful as you are. Okay. It's fine.
If you run around screaming about the Jews and Freemasons, YouTube is not going to promote your channel. It's just not going to.
Imagine that.
Like, there is a limit to what you can say, and it's sad because, like, I'm not a sedevacantist, but there are some sedevacantist channels that are very interesting to watch, and they are willing to go places not just with the church problems, but with like social problems.
Yeah.
Like, there's a channel called Defeat Modernism run by a sedevacantist, and he had a video because his channel got nuked because he didn't care. He just started Defeat Modernism too and came back, but he didn't put everything back up. And he had a great video on the Beatles. Yeah. Fascinating about some of the like weird, like, did John Lennon sell his soul? And the guy said, if he did it on this day, which I think was a Marian feast day, actually.
Wow.
And then like 20 years later to the day was when he was assassinated. Spooky stuff. And when he was going through their music, because their music sounds like boy band kind of pop rock, right? Not that big a deal. But when you like look at the album artwork and some of the stuff that like they were getting into, you can see why they can make the point. And some of that fringier content is very interesting because it does force you to think a little bit, right?
Yeah, it does.
And it's, maybe the Beatles didn't sell their soul, but at the same time, I'm not one to tell people, don't listen to rock music, don't listen to hip hop. Be careful what of that stuff you listen to, right? Like if there's some guy rapping about, the stuff he likes to do, after hours with the ladies, maybe that's not something you should be spending a lot of time listening to if he's getting kind of graphic, right?
Yeah.
Or if he's advocating, doing drugs, hard drugs and stuff, maybe, exercise some discernment.
Exactly. Be careful what your eyes. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Remember, I grew up Protestant, so I remember singing that song. Yeah. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. There's a lot of truth to that, and these days we have to be very discerning what we do consume, especially by way of entertainment, because it can be so subversive to our psychology. We have to be very careful, for sure.
Especially like I always found it weird when I would see Catholics reviewing Game of Thrones. And I don't mean like that new House of the Dragon, which apparently has like almost no sex stuff in it. which is weird for Game of Thrones. I was like, last time I saw Game of Thrones, it was like I felt like I was turning on 8 Cinemax late at night or something. But it was
it's horrible.
Not that version of Game of Thrones where I guess the filmmakers decided, hey, maybe we should tell a story. Focus on getting our story told. I'm like,
what a novel concept.
That's right. Like, all right, who wants to tell a story? All in favor say aye. Ayes have it. All right, let's do it.
I'm not one who says a film or a show aimed at adults. If you're going to show someone get hitting in the face with a Morning Star and you decide you want to make it realistic, if it's aimed at adults, as long as you warn people ahead of time, this is, make it clear early on that this is not going to pull punches. I don't necessarily object to that as long as you're not glorifying it. In fact, sometimes really showing what a weapon will do to somebody is the opposite of glorifying it. It may actually go, whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't know that if I spray an automatic weapon into a room with people, it doesn't do it. It doesn't, people don't just fall over, but it might actually be like horrifying what it does. It might actually give you a new perspective on violence.
Sure.
But that show,
I have a nuanced position on that one,
glorified torture. Yeah, I have a generally nuanced one too.
I have a bit of a nuanced position on that in the sense that I agree with you. I do believe that is how it should work. Like when you show the harsh reality of something, we should go, wow, we don't want any part of that. That's horrible. Like that ought to be our natural response. But I use myself as the example. When I joined the Marine Corps at 17, my mom signed me over and the Marine Corps took me away. I had memorized Full Metal Jacket. I had watched it probably 1,000 times. I watched Heartbreak Ridge 1,000 times. I memorized Top Gun.
I had nightmares from Full Metal Jacket when I was a kid because my grandpa was visiting right after that movie had hit home video, and my mom rented it, and they watched it. And man, that movie.
that movie was designed by Stanley Kubrick to be a wake-up call to the horrors of war, to the harsh, gritty, nasty, disgusting reality of the horrors of war. It was an anti-war film, but I watched it 1,000 times, and all I got out of it was blood and guts. Kill them all, let God sort them out. And I thought it was romantic. I thought it was the hardcore Marine Corps way.
With that way. I thought I'm kind of surprised.
Well, and the reason why I came away with that was because I was addicted to pornography, and I saw the lens through the perverted lens. I saw the world through the perverted lens of pornography. So my brain was twisted and wasn't thinking straight. And when I was at boot camp, one day I was the recruit. I was the guide, so I was like in charge of all the other recruits, and I got to lead the platoon in a jog. And we went running as a platoon in formation, and I got to sing cadence. So I sang the cadence from Full Metal Jacket, and my senior drill instructor thought I was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, he was just so cloud nine. And that's the reality is you can see something that was designed to give you a truth pill, and you could see it in a different way because your mind is so distorted from the ways of the world. And that's the issue I have is when we embrace things like, the dragon film thing, whatever, I forget what that's called. You said it a second ago and I just blanked. Like the porn that's involved in that. We see this stuff and we get desensitized to it. And maybe if you're not addicted to porn like I was, and you weren't as perverted in the mind as I was, then maybe you'd see it the right way. And you would see, like I tell my sons all the time, I'm like, because my sons, they have a natural attraction towards military service because it's built into our DNA as men to protect and provide and to serve. So they see that and they see the romantic notion of it.
These days? How do they feel about that these days, though, with the military as a... And just to be clear, I'm not endorsing Game of Thrones. Please, like I said, I was surprised.
No, I know you weren't, but I wanted to illustrate that because
sometimes
the
I feel
world...
like I have to be blunt about it,
Yeah, the world sees it opposite, and that's the point I was trying to make. And and I had to tell my sons about the harsh reality of boot camp. I mean, I could sit here, I could do an entire podcast just on boot camp stories. I mean, I could tell you, I could make a whole career out of telling Marine Corps boot camp stories and having guests tell their boot camp stories. Disgusting, perverse things that happen at 2 a.m. in a Marine Corps barracks. I could tell stories. I could literally tell stories.
I'm sure you could.
Why? Because the brain gets twisted when it's addicted to porn, when it sees the world through a secular lens. Bad things happen, bad decisions are made, which is how you get a Satan after-school club in Connecticut. Very highly educated people with advanced degrees had to sign off on giving Satan the opportunity to have an after-school club in America.
I will tell you something
let
here.
That sink in.
In the last 30 years, pornography went from something that you had to buy either from a catalog or maybe on a website in the rudimentary internet where you were ordering something to be mailed to you, or you had to go to a part of town you didn't necessarily want to. And then you walk out the door with like, a black bag. Like there was a bus line in Portland where I grew up that would pass one of these places. And, there was everybody knew where it was. And so when some guy or sometimes a woman would get on the bus with a mysterious black plastic bag, you knew exactly what they were buying. Right. Yeah. That's how it went. And now it's everywhere, to the point where they're pushing it in elementary schools. It's one of like early on when I started taking my faith seriously, I wrestled with the Game of Thrones question, and it became harder for me when they took all the sex out of it, because they did at some point. But what finally did it for me was they replaced the porno sex with porno violence. And it wasn't like realistic sword damage or realistic morning star to the face. It was torture.
Yeah.
You've heard the term torture porn. There were things in one of those later seasons that looked like something Eli Roth came up with in one of his his quote horror movies, which were really just watch somebody get brutalized for 2 hours kind of movies.
Yeah, it's violence.
That was what finally did it for me many years ago. And the funny thing was, I was invested enough in the story. I wanted to know how it ended, so I went onto YouTube and found just YouTube reviewers. And I found some angry nerds who were just talking about how downhill the show had gone, and they watched it and they told me what happened, and I was quite happy. And then these guys also helped break my attachment to Star Wars. I used to be a big nerd, and
me too. Yeah.
I walked out of The Force Awakens going, well, that was a pretty competently made apology from Disney saying, look, we know how to remake Star Wars. Let's see what happens with the sequel. And boy, howdy, did that help to break my detachment from all that stuff. And then, it's weird because a lot of guys who grow up with that stuff, they want to show their kids that. And I'm like, well, the problem is I don't want to lie to my kid and say there's only 6 of these movies, because everything Disney made was propaganda. Even The Mandalorian became propaganda after the second season.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't propaganda, it was literally like badly written fan fiction with ridiculous budgets, which is why I'm paying attention to what's happening to Disney. Have you heard what's Disney's going through now? And I don't mean like blockbuster movie failures. They have an activist investor who's a conservative who's bought so many billions of dollars of shares now that he's trying to buy a seat on the board. And Bob Iger's desperately trying to keep this from happening.
Your money.
And then another activist investor is doing the same thing. Well, what they're trying to do is take Disney over so they can fire everybody and return it to making family-friendly content.
Fair enough, but burn it down.
Fascinating.
Burn it down, because it's not worth saving your billions of dollars. You want to use your billions of dollars to be effective? Give it to people like us who are going to go out and crush the head of Satan on planet Earth with billions of dollars of capital to be able to create distribution networks that properly can impact society. But no rich Catholic, no rich conservative, there's no George Soros on our team. We have to do this stuff in the middle of the night with our own efforts, because no Soros is out there giving us billions of dollars, but they'll save Disney. Burn the thing down. It's not worth saving.
Right. This is what's funny about it, because these are conservatives who want to make family-friendly content, but what they are forgetting about is that they are wedded to mammon. And so they want to make family-friendly content to make money, not because necessarily the impact on society it'll have, and not to honor God or anything. When in reality, Disney should be let to go bankrupt and then let some other corporation buy the Disney label and decide, hey, all those Disney princesses from like up to the 60s were pretty good. We can make money off the stuff from the 90s and maybe some of the early Pixar stuff, and then we just bury the rest.
Yeah.
Bury the rest, starting with like Cars 2 onward. Just bury the rest.
That's right.
But no, that's because like I don't have a problem if my son watches Winnie the Pooh, right? You're going to have a hard time proving to me where the subversive nature of Pooh Bear and Piglet and Tigger doing their thing is buried. But you're not going to have a hard time. Like, are you aware that there are people online who jokingly say that Gaston was actually the hero of Beauty and the Beast?
Oh man.
There's a caricature. He is a caricature of the patriarchy and of traditionalism. He's a caricature of it.
Yeah.
And the first song that Belle sings in that movie is about how there has to be more than this pastoral life. She's describing this idyllic community that a lot of Catholics look at and go, man, I'd love to live there. That sounds great. There's a parish priest walking down the street, I can go buy freshly made bread. I go do honest work for a living, and I don't have to worry about, World War III and pornography and all this other stuff.
Right.
And there has to be more to it than that. She's like an 80s feminist. And the people, like, there are people who like kind of half jokingly say that Gaston was the actual hero of the movie.
I was going to bring that up,
and that's
Anthony, because
89, by the way.
I was going to bring that up because it sometimes works both ways, where people co-opt, modern things that are supposed to be making fun of and mocking and calling out, conservatives, traditionalists, anything like that. But because they don't have a good alternative that's attractive, people just latch on to the supposed villains. Like what's a great song is from that Far Cry 5 video game, which I've never played, but the villains are like Catholic fundamentalists or Christian fundamentalists, and they created a song about like keep your rifle by your side that's supposed to be a satire of them. It's a great song that exactly describes why we should keep our rifles by our side. It's an amazing song.
As a friend of mine likes to tell me, the best the reason that you see a lot of young people suddenly, looking at some of the fascists from previous eras and going, and you might be like, whoa, guys, the aesthetics are cool, and I know why you like this. But the reason that is because the socialists and these radicals out there, they have no idea that they actually make these radical ideologies, like more radical versions of right-wing ideologies, look attractive. Because they don't know how to caricature anything. Their caricatures are too on the money. Go Starship Troopers, the movie, is a good example of that. If you can find a cut of it without the nudity.
Yeah, there you go. Good luck. Thank you, Mormons and the Angel Studios, for giving us some tools to be able to watch something without all the junk in our minds. Got to leave it to the Mormons. Where are Catholics? Where are the Catholics? Got to leave it to the Mormons, for crying out loud. Hey, speaking of schismatics, Beth, you're absolutely wrong about the Orthodoxy. There is no salvation outside the church, and Arianism decimated your version of things. So pray on that. God bless you. God love you. We'll see you guys back here on Monday.